bringing you in-depth discussion from one of the rad groups of online writers covering the Edmonton Oilers. Are you ready for Oilers Overtime? Join us as we talk news, rumors, trades, player grades, game results, and more. All featured on one of the most glorified teams in the NHL. From the great one to the next one. From the boys on the bus to the decade of darkness. This is Oilers Overtime.
Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of THW Oilers Overtime. My name is Jim Parsons, here as always with Colton Pankiw. Colton, how you doing, buddy?
Good. Obviously, a bit of a boring hockey week right now. I think there's only one or two games left for the All-Star break, but pretty good.
Yeah, you know what? I didn't even know there was a game today. Like, I was thinking I was all geared up for the All-Star break. I'm looking at my fantasy team, not thinking, and then all of a sudden I get this ding that I'm getting a couple points on my team. I'm like, oh, there's a game today. Like, I'm so sort of checked out because the Oilers finished a couple days ago and I've seen pictures of them on vacation already. You know, Holloway's got an iguana with a hat on and all these like crazy pictures. I'm like, I'm not even thinking about hockey at this point. I'm just getting ready for the trade deadline, which is coming up pretty quick once this All-Star break comes in. We're going to talk about that today. So we're going to chat a little bit. This entire episode is going to be about rumors and speculation, the names that have been linked to the Oilers. We're going to start with Bo Horvat, not because he is still linked to the Oilers, but because at one point he sort of was. I'm not sure exactly how serious the Oilers were, but I'm going to throw this one to you. We'll go back and forth. I'm going to throw you the Bo Horvat one first. I'm just going to ask you this. Are you kind of happy as an Oilers follower? Should the Oilers be happy? Let's put it that way. Should the Oilers be happy that Horvat has gone? He's off the trade market. He's gone to the New York Islanders. Just really no chance at this point, unless the Islanders choose to flip him because it doesn't go well and they don't make the playoffs, that Edmonton's even on the radar now for Horvat. They're going to have to move in another direction if they were thinking about him. What's your take on the Horvat trade and how it pertains to the Oilers?
I mean, as far as any of those rumors, like you said, I don't think there was a lot of stuff there just because it wouldn't have made sense. But I mean, if he would have gone to the Oilers, I would have been happy with it. He's obviously a really good player having his best season. But I think as far as him being moved, I think it is good for the Oilers in the sense that he went to a team that's not only in their division, but not in their conference. So I think that helps a lot as well. Obviously going to the Islanders, a team that they really won't see much and then kind of see how they do. I thought the whole trade itself was a bit of a strange fit, just given that the Islanders are out of the playoffs right now. It just wasn't a team that I think anyone really had on their radar. But again, I'm happy as an Oilers fan just to see him kind of get out of the division and the conference.
Yeah, that's a good point. He's not playing for Vancouver anymore. So that's not going to hurt the Oilers as much. It'll be interesting. I really am not sold that the Islanders are going to be a playoff team, even with Bo Horvat on that roster. So it'll be interesting to see what they do, because if they don't get into the playoffs, he did say that he's open to talking about a contract extension, but I'm not sure that he does it. And if he doesn't, and the Oilers or the Islanders win in, he could get flipped again. It wouldn't shock me at all if they now put him on the market. Looking at what they gave away, though, in terms of the return to Vancouver, that's kind of, if you compare what the Oilers would have had to do, first round pick, probably Philip Broberg, probably a roster player that was as good. If there was somebody like Anthony Beauvillier, who I don't know on the Oilers registers in that regard, but that's a pretty hefty price to pay for a rental who you may or may not, get to keep. So I'm kind of glad that he's, he's probably off the, I would have liked him, but I don't know if I would have liked the price. All right, your turn. Throw out a name for me and I'll go.
Yeah, so one that I've kind of seen pop up in the last few days, and I'm sure you have too, is Nick Bjugstad of the Arizona Coyotes. And then with that as well was Shayne Gostisbehere. I'm not sure, again, how much substance that one has. I personally don't see much of a fit, but I was curious to get your thoughts on both players.
Well, I actually wrote an article on it today. I put something together when I was looking at the Bjugstad stuff, and I've heard his name too. But what's curious for me is there's going to be a lot of teams on him. He's a $900,000 value contract. He's a good depth piece. He can kill penalty. I think he's got 11 goals, 10 of which are coming on 5-on-5, and one is shorthanded. So it's a perfect fit in terms of what the Oilers or people have listed the Oilers need. The Gostisbehere stuff, though, is very interesting because he is not necessarily what the Oilers need. Now, they are looking for an experienced defenseman. He can play both the left and the right side, but he's not really defensively, his prowess on defense is not great. He's a good offensive player. He's had a half-season season. I'm more curious to see if whether or not this is maybe the cost of doing business if you want to get Bjugstad, because if there's that many teams on him, the Oilers are going to have to overbid, overpay, or whatever. Maybe they sort of like Gostisbehere. Maybe they say, you know what, He's injured, right? Too. He's out for a month.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know how bad that injury is. Maybe they know more than we know. Maybe there's an LTR play here where the Oilers get to push that down the road for a month and they don't have to trade anybody. Like, I just think there's more going on here than meets the eye, because I don't really see the fit for Gostisbehere on the Oilers. I don't think he's the guy that would be on your radar if you're Ken Holland going, yeah, we want that player. I think there's more to it. I think it has a lot to do with Bjugstad. I think it has a lot to do with maybe the LTIR situation and his injury. It's kind of a weird one for me. That said, could I see it happening? Yes, I absolutely could. I don't know where the salary retention comes in and who goes back to Arizona, because you're going to have to move somebody. But could Puljujarvi go, and could they retain enough salary to make that work? Possibly. But it's very interesting. Yeah, Gostisbehere is an odd one for me. You had talked about Joel Edmundson a lot in some of your articles, and there was some attachment to Joel Edmundson from Montreal potentially going to the Oilers. George Laraque has sort of said, don't go near that. He is not healthy. There's back issues. He's done. What is your opinion on Joel Edmundson possibly being on the Oilers' radar?
Yeah, as far as the injuries, obviously, I don't know anything about that. That's Laraque's kind of opinion, whether he has insight on that or it's kind of just a rumor that he's heard as well. I don't know. But right after he said it, I seen that Edmundson, I think, missed like a game or two since then. So I don't know if there maybe is something to that, but I was kind of hesitant on him right from the beginning, just given the price tag. I do like the fact that he has an extra year on his contract, but it sounds like Montreal was looking for quite a bit back, at least a few months ago. Maybe that's dropped a little bit since. So it would depend. And obviously it would be a money in, kind of money out thing as well with the Oilers cap situation. So if they were maybe looking at taking a young player like Puljujarvi back, obviously the Habs are still rebuilding here. So that could be something of interest. And if it was like that, then kind of maybe a second round pick or something, then maybe it is something you look at. But from what I've heard before, kind of a first round pick, maybe a prospect, that seems like a pretty heavy price to pay. But if that has come down, then I think he is a player that could, I don't know if he'd be a top 4, but he would definitely be a solid top 6 option for them, especially come the playoffs. Like we had talked about last week, the Oilers do still have a few kind of inexperienced question marks in their back end. So I think they could do worse. I'm not crazy about what I had heard from the price point being a couple months back.
Yeah, they did say that Montreal would be looking for a first. What we'd heard back in the day was that they weren't really keen on even trading them. They're like, if we don't trade them for what we want, we'll just keep them. We like them, whatever. But the injury situation is an interesting one because he's had major back problems. He is out right now as day to day, but you wonder if a guy like that, if everything's going downhill from here, you like the idea of a term. I would be really cautious of it because if he does have major health issues, and if Laraque, who does a lot of broadcasts for the Montreal Canadiens, is on to something and he knows something there, that would be really kind of whatever. Now, maybe you have a player who's on LTR for that whole second year. I don't know, but it's kind of like I don't really know. He fits the mold, the defensive kind of big guy who was physical at one point, has playoff experience in Stanley Cup on his resume, but yeah, really kind of an interesting one. Let's go with Anthony Duclair. Here's a forward that I saw you mention in one of your articles where I think it was Frank Saravalli just tossed out the idea. I think he's quoted as, let's have a little fun with this one. Let's swap Jesse Puljujarvi for Anthony Duclair. What did you think about that one when you read that?
So the trade straight up obviously wouldn't happen. I mean, I was kind of surprised with the move the Panthers made this summer, but that said, I still don't see it being a straight up situation. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. You have a guy coming off a 31 goal, I think 58-point season that only makes the exact same amount of money as Puljujarvi, and has an extra year on his deal as well. So I think he's kind of a guy that in Florida, they were talking about moving earlier in the year, kind of for cap reasons, but also I think just they felt that the season prior, they had so many offensive weapons on that team and not a lot of structure to their game. And that's kind of been a knock on Duclair in the past, as he's not maybe the most defensive forward out there, but offensively he's great. And I just considered maybe if the Oilers were to add a pick or a prospect, would Florida maybe consider doing that just to mix something up? Obviously Duclair hasn't played yet this season, but the team as a whole has kind of struggled, and it's something I think worth pursuing. Like you said, I don't think the chances of it happening are great, but I mean, it doesn't hurt to just play around with it. And like you said, I think Saravalli was kind of tongue in cheek, just seeing where that would go, but it's definitely a player that if the Oilers had a chance to add, especially at his price tag, I think would be a great fit on their team.
Yeah, I mean, Duclair's got that experience offensively, right? 31 goals, I think at one point. If it wasn't last year, he did that. Yeah, he could, be an offensive guy for you. My only question is, what do you do if you move Puljujarvi in that deal? and you have a wash for salary, you'd no longer have Puljujarvi to dangle out there in a trade, right? And so if you need to use Puljujarvi to get something else and to solve some of your cap problems, you no longer have that because you've traded him for Anthony Duclair. So it's an interesting one.
To me, if they pick him up, that would suggest that they're not adding defenseman, which I agree with you, would not be ideal this season, especially kind of given that their bigger need is on the back end. But again, a player that definitely would make them better.
Yeah, no, for sure. All right, your turn. You got one for me?
Yeah, just looking here. I think Matt Dumba was a guy that's got people talking a lot a couple of weeks ago. I think the Oilers and the Senators, Drager had said, were two Canadian teams that had showed a lot of interest. And I know we had kind of touched on it briefly, but didn't get into a lot. And I was just kind of curious. I actually don't know a ton about him. It seems like fans in Minnesota, from what I've seen, are kind of split 50-50, obviously talented, but maybe a bit of a gamble. I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on him.
Well, from what I've read, what I've seen, what I know of him, he's inconsistent. He was really solid for a while, and that has come and gone in spurts. He's kind of on the outs in Minnesota at this point. He's been a healthy scratch a couple times. I read that Bill Guerin was like, there was real value there, and he plays quite a few minutes per game, right? It's not like when he's in the lineup, he plays a lot. And Darren Dreger, I think, was the one reported. He's like, if they're going to move Dumba, they need to replace Dumba because Minnesota's still in the playoff conversation, right? So you don't necessarily just take a defenseman. That said, he got scratched like right after those comments were made, and they haven't really used him a whole lot since then. So I'm wondering if Minnesota has just sort of decided that maybe Dumba's not their guy, and if they are going to make a move for somebody bigger, like a Jakob Chychrun or something like that. And if that's the case, Ottawa and Edmonton were the two teams. I don't know that Ottawa's in this conversation anymore, because if the Senators are not going to be a playoff team, now they've won 3 in a row, but they may not make the playoffs even after the big swing they took this summer. And so if they're not in on Dumba, and there's no reason to be if he's a pending UFA and you're not going to make the playoffs, then Oilers are kind of the team, right? And so at what point can you get Dumba for like a song, right? Like, can you really get Minnesota to retain half the salary? Because this is the only year that the Wild can really retain salary cap hit, because next year it gets really ugly for them. So could they get Dumba at like whatever the cost would be, $3 million, and do something with it, move something the other way? It's possible. I don't know if Dumba's the guy. He hasn't been wonderful this season, but maybe a change of scenery, right? Maybe that's all it takes. Maybe he just needs to play somewhere else. Maybe his time in Minnesota is up and he just needs somewhere else to go. And if that's the case, it wouldn't strike me as a total shocker if Dumba is the guy that the Oilers go with. I'm not sure I would do it, but wouldn't shock me at all. We've talked about him a lot. I'm going to let you take this one. Vladislav Gavrikov, or Gavrikov, depending on how you say it, out of Columbus, is a guy who was on a lot of people's radars, including the Oilers. We got to see him kind of up close and personal when the Columbus Blue Jackets beat the Oilers in overtime that one game. I was looking for it, but I still didn't really notice that Gavrikov stood out for me. What did you see when you watched that game? Was there anything that told you, yeah, this is the guy the Oilers should go after?
Well, I think you kind of mentioned it yourself that he didn't stand out a ton. I think that's kind of what I'm reading is kind of what he is. Like, he's not an overly flashy guy. I think he's a guy that could probably play in the Oilers top 4. Again, it's kind of similar to Edmundson, that the price point or the price tag you were hearing a few months back seemed fairly steep for a guy that honestly I knew almost nothing about before the season started. But in that game, I didn't think he was horrible by any means. Again, like, he didn't stand out a ton. But I do think I was always big on Jakob Chychrun, and I kind of sailed on that, obviously, but we talked about the growth of Broberg recently and everything. And I think if there is one defenseman out there that makes the most sense, especially with his contract being off next year, then you can revisit in the offseason if you want to bring him back. He is kind of the one, I think, at this point that does make the most sense. Like, if they are, I like that he's on the left side too. I think that's kind of the side the Oilers should focus a bit more on right now. So I think if there is a defenseman they're going to add, he, out of any names I've seen suggested, makes the most sense.
Yeah, again, you mentioned it with one of the other guys. The price point for me is the key here, right? Yeah. When you've got that many teams who are rumored to be interested in Gavrikov, then you're kind of like, okay, well, what are we paying here? Like, it's going to be a first for sure. Like, from what we're understanding, Jeff Merrick, I think, is the one who reported that they want at least what they got for David Savard, which is a first and a third.
A lot. Yeah.
So that's a lot to give up for a guy who's probably going to be a rental. And because of Broberg, and because you probably, unless you're moving Kulak, unless you're sending Kulak the other way or you're getting rid of him or you're moving him out, you don't have room necessarily for a person that you're going to be bringing in and you want to talk about a contract extension with, which is what you would have to do with Gavrikov to really make it worth paying that much to get him. So price point's really key for me. I do think he fits a lot of what the Oilers could be looking for. And maybe you're right. Maybe the fact that you don't notice him is a good thing, right? That he doesn't stand out either way, that he's not really flashy, but he also doesn't make a ton of mistakes is probably not the worst thing in the world. You mentioned him. Let's go there real quick. Jakob Chychrun, are you completely are we done? Like, is this a conversation where the Oilers are not in on this player, that the ask is too high, or because we haven't heard much about him in the last few weeks, because he was like the number one guy in the trade deadline for the longest time, and we don't hear much about him anymore. He's still going to get moved probably, but are the Oilers out of this?
It's weird because there was so much talk about him being moved last season too, and then never happened. And before this season started and early in the season, it seemed like it was just kind of weeks, even days away from happening. And still hasn't. And his name's kind of cooled off, not only with the Oilers, but kind of on all fronts again. So it's just, I feel like it's something where maybe all these teams kind of agree that this price point the Coyotes originally put out was a bit too high. So maybe they have to drop it a bit, but I don't know. I think at this point, like, the ship's kind of sailed. The Oilers seem to have been, I guess earlier, as a kind of a thing of desperation when they're struggling. Now that they're playing better, it just, I don't know. I think there's better options out there. I do still really like Chychrun. I think whoever gets him is going to get a really good player on a good contract, assuming he can stay healthy. But I can't see the Oilers making a play on him at this point. I feel like if they were going to get him, they would have a couple months back.
Yeah, there's going to be a team out there that gets him. I'm not sure if it's the Kings. I'm not sure who it's going to be. Somebody's going to probably pony up for this player. I mentioned the Wild earlier. Like, somebody's going to make their move, right? And pay a lot to get Jakob Chychrun. And as good as he could be, and as helpful as he would be for the Oilers, whether or not you want to mortgage that many assets to do it, that's a whole other question. Jake McCabe is probably the last guy on our list out of Chicago. There's been talk, I think Frank Zaravalli and a couple other people, Elliot Friedman, has sort of said that the Oilers could be picking around on this one. He's a guy that's got a little bit of term left on his contract. Chicago's selling. Maybe he's not the flashiest name coming out of there because you got Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews and a bunch of people who could potentially be on the move. Do you know much about Jake McCabe? Have you heard anything in that regard?
So I kind of read a few things, and then I know that you had talked about him. So that was actually the name I was going to ask you about next, kind of what you think about him, like what's kind of the price tag that's being talked about, because I don't know a lot about his game.
I don't know what the price is going to be, honestly. Like, I don't necessarily think that Chicago is shopping the player. I think that they're probably listening to somebody coming to them and making offers. I've heard Toronto might be interested in this. I think there's a couple other teams that might ask. And I think Chicago is probably taking, flyers on anybody at this point. If somebody's going to make an offer, they're going to be willing to listen to it. I think he's probably the perfect fit on that left side in the second pairing. He's more of a physical guy. He's not going to give you a ton of offense, but he is really good at kind of shutting down things. He doesn't mind getting physical. He doesn't mind throwing them. So he's got a lot of those attributes that the Oilers are looking for. The real question is, what does he do to some of your other players? He's going to bump Kulak down to the third pair for sure. And then you wonder, okay, well, what happens with Philip Broberg? Because again, he's got term left on his deal. I think his number's somewhere around what Chychrun's making. So it's not like the Oilers, if they get him, they got to do something with him. They're going to use him, right? And they must figure that he's replacing somebody they have on the roster who they like him better. So I don't know what the ask is, to be honest, and I'm not sure what it would take to get him. I think he's probably in that list of maybe the top 2 or 3 go, that if you're looking at somebody that fits what the Oilers might need, he's probably in there. I'm not sure. It'll be very interesting. We didn't mention this one, but I'm going to ask you, I'm putting you on the spot. I told you I wouldn't do this, but Luke Schenn out of Vancouver, because we are hearing now that Vancouver is like open for business on everybody. Like, even Patrick Allvin said today, he said, I think, quote, it would take a significant offer for me to even consider moving Elias Pettersson, Quinn Hughes, or Thatcher Demko, but he's not shutting the door on it. So that tells me that Luke Schenn's probably the next name to go. He's been mentioned in rumors. There's a lot of people that like his contract. He's a Stanley Cup experienced defenseman. Would you look at Luke Schenn if you're the Oilers?
Yeah, I said before I was kind of bigger on adding someone on that left side, but Luke Schenn's kind of the exception on the right. There's a few guys, but I think I like, again, the cap hit, like you mentioned, the fact that he has the winning experience, but also the fact that he's kind of one of those guys that when we talk about who are the Oilers going to bump in the lineup if they bring in a blue liner, he's kind of the guy that can sit up in the press box and be brought in every like so often. Like he did it with Tampa for a few years there. Like he does it with plenty of teams for a good chunk of his career, the last, I don't know, 5+ years now, where he's kind of that 6th, 7th defenseman who is solid on the back end. He's good defensively, and he's a guy that, can come in and out of the lineup whenever you call upon him. So I think just for the remainder of the season, I think that he's a guy that wouldn't probably cost a ton to get. Maybe a interdivision trade raises the price slightly, but he's one of those few guys on the right side that I do think that they should take a look at, especially with his cap hit.
Yeah, I think there's going to be more teams in on Luke Schenn than we probably realize. I think there's going to be a number of teams that are interested in this. That said, if you can get him for a half decent price, I think you like the leadership. I think you like his physicality. I think you like his experience. He's apparently like beloved by his teammates, which is important. I think those are things that you want to look at when you're adding somebody, especially if it's just going to be for a short run. I think we probably covered most of the names attached to the Oilers. So let's switch gears a little bit here, because we had a little chat about this before we started recording, and I think it's probably worth talking about. We've mentioned the All-Star Game in the past. We've been watching over the past couple of days is what's going on with this. I mean, Bo Horvat gets traded to the Eastern Conference, and now what the heck is going on with the Western Conference spot that he was picking for? He was slotting in for Vancouver there. The NHL's going to have to decide something. Matty Beniers is out for Seattle. They couldn't find a replacement from the Kraken, so they got Chandler Stevenson coming in for the Vegas Golden Knights. Yet, for whatever reason, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and Zach Hyman are not on the NHL's radar. At least they weren't named as replacements. Now, we're going to be a little biased because we cover the Oilers, but is that ridiculous? Like, is that you've got two guys who are like killing it this season? Their numbers are incredible. I don't know where Nugent-Hopkins is in terms of the top scorers in the NHL, but he's up there. Is it weird that neither one of those two players was asked or was considered?
Yeah, I think so. Like when I'd seen Chandler Stevenson's name yesterday, we kind of talked about it for a brief second before the show, but I was kind of surprised. And then I looked it up, and he actually is having a better year than I had thought. And he actually had a good season last year too. So I was a bit caught off guard by that. But again, I think that if there was anyone in the Pacific go out with an injury and you just thought off the top of your head who would replace him, and I'm not even sure it's bias. I feel like a lot of fans from teams would say one of Nugent-Hopkins or Hyman. They're both right up there, like with the league leaders, both on pace for 100 or very close to 100 points this season. So, and I think sometimes that does get overlooked, and people kind of credit that to McDavid and Draisaitl, the power play. Like you hear all of that, but I think anyone that watches the team closely enough realizes how valuable they are. And it would have been nice. I'm not sure if Nugent-Hopkins early in his career has ever been to an All-Star game, but I think
he went once.
Yeah,
I think he went once.
I couldn't imagine Hyman was, especially in Toronto, playing behind, again, two other superstars in Matthews and Marner. So it would have been nice to see a guy like him get his first one in, but yeah, unfortunately it didn't happen.
I wonder if it's because of there's the fact that 3 Oilers are already going, right? Yeah. You've got McDavid, you've got Draisaitl and Skinner, which then begs the question, if that is why they were not asked and they didn't want to send 4 people from one team, is that another whatever about the way that the NHL picks their All-Stars? I mean, what's your opinion on the whole idea that you need one person from every team? To me, I think it's the most ridiculous thing in the world. Why would you just not send the best players to the best of best competition, which is supposed to be the All-Star game? And we know a lot of players don't even want to go, but the idea is to send the best of the best. And you cannot possibly do that if your mandate is to send one from every team. So do you think that's why they weren't probably considered, because that would then put 4 Oilers at the All-Star game?
I think that probably plays a pretty big role in it. Yeah, like Vegas obviously only had the one in Logan Thompson. So I think that does do something. And as far as you said about having one guy per team, I get the thought process behind it. You want kind of each fan base to feel represented, and it gives them more of an incentive maybe to tune in. But I think you're losing a lot of, not maybe a lot, but I think you have more viewers who would want to just watch all the best players as opposed to maybe some guys on weaker teams that probably shouldn't be there and are because of that. So I've never really understood that either. Again, I get what they're thinking, but I think that they'd be better off to just select the best players rather than one off each team.
Well, and why not do this? If you're going to try to, like NBA does it. I don't know if the NHL has ever done it. Maybe they did it once. Why not, for the skills competition, send somebody who's good at that skill? And it might not be an all-star, but it could be somebody from a team that isn't represented. Say, for example, as much as Trevor Zegras is in the news for all the wrong reasons this week, he is a flashy, perfect person for the skills competition. And he didn't make the team as an all-star because Troy Terry is going for Anaheim. But if you needed a player from Anaheim, because for whatever reason Troy Terry couldn't go and they didn't pick Zegras, but you could use him in the all-star skills competition, then somebody from Anaheim is still represented, right? You could still get somebody from Seattle over there. You could still get somebody from whatever team. It just makes the most sense to just have somebody from the all-star skills competition representing a team. Now, again, if you don't have anybody on your team, if you're just a terrible bottom feeding, bottom two, you probably don't have all-stars on your team really. So it might be a challenge, but that speaks more to the choice by the franchise to not be very good. So what are you supposed to do in that respect? Are you going to watch the All-Star game?
No, I have tried a few times in the last few years, and the skills competition, every once in a while, there's certain things from that. But again, I'm not really watching. I'll kind of see different things from my phone, and it's interesting and stuff like that. But the All-Star game itself is a tough watch, I find. I don't know what they can do to change it. I know they tried kind of adding money a few years ago, and that didn't really seem to work. I think it's more something that those guys that are there kind of having a relaxing weekend, having fun prior to, after all that, and just kind of take it like that, kind of like a pond hockey game. And I don't blame them for doing it. I don't know what the league could ever do to make it more intense, I guess.
Yeah, I'm way more interested in the skills competition than I am the actual
sure.
game itself, like the pitch and puck, whatever that's supposed to be. It's a mix of golf and hockey. I mean, that sort of piques my interest just to see what kind of a mess it's going to be. But like, I'm kind of more intrigued by that than I am the actual game, because I didn't even know what the format is. Like, I know they have the divisions against each other and then they work down to but I don't know how long the periods are. I don't know how long they play. Like, I've so tuned out from how that actual game goes down and how they've structured it now. That goes to tell you they just need to do a lot more work when it comes to that sort of thing.
For sure.
Final topic here. Let's talk a little bit about how hot the Oilers are heading into the All-Star break. I do have a question. Do you think this is good timing, bad timing? We've got 3 players going, but there's a whole team who was really on a roll here. They just destroyed Chicago heading into the break. Sometimes it's not the best to be taking a break. And as we saw, and we said in the last podcast or the last video cast, when you take a break and you're the Oilers, you end up playing like you played against Columbus and the last place team beats you in overtime. So how not good? Do you believe in that? Is this really bad timing to give the Oilers a week and a half off and say, you know what, you guys were playing some of the best hockey in the league. You're like 7-2-1 or something. And now you have to sit for a week and you don't get to stay on a roll here.
Yeah, that's funny. I forgot that you had kind of called that last show before the Columbus game, and then
I also called it to be 5-1 and was way wrong.
But you did say something about that break and it being the Oilers and all that. But I think probably not the ideal time. I think obviously you'd like to keep playing when you're rolling like that. But if they had the opposite stretch and went in kind of on a tough note, you're like, oh boy, like this could be really ugly coming off of that. So I don't think it's the worst thing. Obviously, they kind of built some points up in that wild card position right now, and I think they're only 3 off the division lead. So yeah, it would have been nice to have been able to keep rolling. But the one nice thing is their schedule coming out of this, I think the first 5 or 6 games or so is quite easy. So obviously no simple games in the NHL. We just saw that with that Blue Jackets one. But as far as the schedule coming out of the All-Star break, you couldn't have one much better on paper than the Oilers do. So I think that helps a lot too.
Yes, they should be winning these hockey games. Like they absolutely are playing teams that the way that the Oilers are playing when they're playing their best hockey, they should be destroying these teams. But as we saw, you never know what group's going to show up. And you can't put it like Columbus, to their credit, did not play like the last place team in the NHL that game. Yeah. Like somebody didn't tell them they stink, right? They showed up and they played pretty good hockey. So that could surprise some people, right? We also saw with Chicago that they had creamed Calgary the night before. And we figured, oh boy, this could be interesting, but they always creamed them. So it just sort of depends on what mood they're in and how they're playing and if they're on a roll and things like that. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they come out of this break. But I don't know what we're going to be talking about here. Do you think there'll be more action? Like, I think the NHL was kind of mad that the Horvat trade went down when it went down. Do you think there'll be more teams doing anything during this break?
I don't think so, just because there's a lot of these guys that right over this time, whether it's with family, teammates, kind of go on vacations. I don't know if it's necessarily fair to those guys. I know it's not a rule, but maybe an unwritten one that around this time you kind of let them do their thing, even if you have a deal maybe under the table, just keep it quiet until the break's over once they get back into game action. But no, I doubt we see another one. It's kind of first time I can remember that one's happened that close to the All-Star break before to begin with. So yeah, I'd be pretty surprised if anything else does.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see if GMs take any time off too, or if they find this is a good opportunity to talk to each other. Like, I don't know if they're thinking, no, we're taking a week off mentally too. We're getting ready for this. It's going to be busy. Let's enjoy a few days. Or if they go, well, we don't have anything else on our schedule right now. Let's talk about this. I don't know, but I don't expect to see any more deals, but I was a little surprised too. I thought, man, that came down. I was just in general surprised that the Oilers did this, or the Islanders did this so quickly.
Yeah, so
it's a long ways to go. That's why I believe that there's a possibility he could get flipped again. We'll see how the Islanders do. Anyway, Colton, appreciate it. Thanks for talking some rumors here with us, everybody else. This has been another edition of THW Oilers Overtime. Don't forget, check out all the content on the Hockey Writers. All your favorite Oilers writers are covering this on a regular basis. Plus, there's other great content on the YouTube channel as well. And check it out. We recommend it and appreciate everybody who listens. So, Colton, thank you again. For everybody else, another edition of Oilers Overtime. Talk to you next time.